Everyone likes having somewhere comfortable to sit outside, but there are two big problems with traditional outdoor sofas. First, they're really expensive, especially if you want something made out of nice materials like real wood. And two, the upholstery is always filthy. So when I decided to build myself a new outdoor sofa, I would tackle those two problems. I would build it myself so I would save on the cost. And then in my design, I integrated some hidden storage compartments so the cushions could be stored away when you're not using them. One of the storage compartments actually holds a secret surprise, so you gotta watch to the end to see what it is. I know for the rest of you guys, the weather is starting to get cold, but here in Arizona, the weather is just now starting to get really nice. We're getting into fall, and so I'm excited to use my outdoor sofa now. This video is sponsored by my friends at the Home Depot. The lumber that I chose to use for my outdoor sofa was Western redwood. It's fairly inexpensive and easy to find at my local Home Depot, but if they don't carry it in your area, another good option would be cedar. I started the build by cutting my 2x4 pieces down to size on my miter saw. This entire project could be done with a circular saw if you don't want to invest or you don't already own some more expensive tools. I've shared a link in the description box below for the full building plans with all the measurements and cut lists. The first portion of the sofa that I tackled is the seat area. The plan was to create a frame that would support some 2x4 slats that would hold up the cushions. I created 4 supports, which I'm calling stringers, that would run from the front to the back of the seat with grooves cut so the slats could sit flush. I think this would be technically a lap joint, not a half lap, but just a lap joint. Let me know if that's correct in the comments below. To make the process a lot quicker as well as more accurate, I decided to gang cut all the grooves in the stringers at the same time. This meant I clamped all 4 boards together and made a mark across the top. I shaded the area to be removed with a pencil just so I wouldn't make a mistake when it came time to cut it. I set the depth of my circular saw blade at 1.5 inches, the same thickness as my seat rails. I then used a speed square to help me make repeated perpendicular cuts in the area that needed to be removed. I made repeated passes, leaving only about 1/8 of an inch of material between each cut. I found I had to use a couple of scrap support blocks to make sure I notched those end pieces all the way to the edge. Next, I got to knock out all the waste material. This is by far my favorite part about cutting joinery with a circular saw. It's so satisfying. It's like finding that chip in the bag that's accidentally stuck together with like 3 other chips. It's so crunchy. I just love it. I then followed up with a chisel and some sandpaper just to get the joint area nice and smooth and flush. So while I got you, you should totally be following me on Instagram. It's where I'm the most active and I like to share all the behind the scenes goodies. When I removed the clamps, I had 4 identical stringers with the grooves cut in the exact same locations. Time to begin the seat assembly. I evenly spaced the stringers between longer rails, and this is where I made my first mistake on the build. I accidentally placed my outer stringers all the way to the furthest ends of the rails. To attach all the wood pieces of this project together, I used an outdoor waterproof glue and outdoor safe deck screws. I worked really hard on this project, and I don't want it to start rusting and falling apart from being outside. I pre-drilled into the softwood to help prevent splitting and then drove 3-inch screws to hold everything together. Now with any outdoor project, it's important that you allow for drainage. If the piece of furniture gets wet, it needs somewhere for the water to go so the wood doesn't get saturated and start to rot. The slats fit into the outermost grooves with no problem because I allowed a 1/4 inch space for that drainage. When it came time to fit the inner slats into the seat, I had a little bit more trouble. Either my board was slightly wider or more likely I just didn't cut that groove slightly wide enough to accommodate it. I tried to force the slat in place with a mallet and you can see what happened. That was my next mistake. I panicked for a second, but then I eventually figured I could just fix this piece with some more wood glue off camera. Once the repairs were made, I held the slats in place with more outdoor glue and 3-inch screws. Next, I started working on the side panels, which I'm calling the arm assemblies. I had to rip a few pieces of 2x4 down to 2.5-inch widths to work as spacers between the legs. I connected pairs of 2x4s together with those spacer blocks, creating kind of C-shaped legs. I created 2 pairs of shorter legs for the arms and then 3 legs for the back section. I then started my biggest, stupidest mistake of the project. Even though I designed the dimensions of my project to work with 5.5-inch by 6-foot long redwood fence pickets, somehow when I went to the store, I had in my mind that I was supposed to be using 3.5-inch pickets. Ironically, the store didn't have enough 3.5-inch wide pickets, so I actually bought 5.5-inch pickets, but then took them home and ripped them down on my table saw to 3.5 inches. So much work and so much waste. I set up a stop block and screwed it to my workbench so I could cut the slats all in equal lengths for each section that I needed. If you're liking what you see, make sure you hit that thumbs up button down below. When I went to put together my first arm assembly, that's when I realized I made a mistake with the siding. Because I used the wrong size fence pickets, the height of the legs that I created was off. Luckily, I only needed to shave off about 1/2 inch, and so I was able to do so on the miter saw. The fence picket siding works as kind of an exoskeleton to hold the legs of the arm assemblies together. Using more glue and 2-inch galvanized brads, I started to connect the legs of the arm assemblies together using some of the fence pickets. Before attaching all the boards in place, I measured opposite corners of the assemblies just to make sure they were all square. With all the boards attached, I basically created a hollow box. I followed the same process to create the back assembly, but used 6 legs instead of 4. Since the back assembly was much larger, I was worried about keeping it square. In order to accommodate the storage trundle, which I'll talk about later, I actually didn't need the lowest piece of siding on the back assembly. In this shot, you can see that I attached it loosely with 1 brad in each corner. That was just to help keep it square. I later removed that board. Before I could start putting the pieces of the sofa together, I made sure to sand the interior sides that would be difficult to reach with a sander later. Next, I laid the back assembly on its back flat, and then my husband helped me pick up and lift the seat into place. We measured to make sure that the seat would be sitting horizontally and level. I then pre-drilled through the inside of the frame of the seat into the back assembly. To help hold it in place, I drove more 3-inch deck screws. We moved the arm assemblies in place to the sides of the seat and attached them with more glue and screws as well. The spacer blocks on the legs not only hold the legs at the proper width, but they also give you an area to attach the pieces together. At this point, I could add the siding to the exposed ends of the arms as well as the back. Instead of measuring, I found it was much more accurate to hold the piece of siding in place and use a pencil to scribe the exact length. Once I had the length of my first piece of siding, I could set up a stop block on the miter saw and cut the rest to that same length. Stop blocks are essential when you have to make this many repeated cuts. I added glue to the back of the siding and then held them in place with more 2-inch brads. Once again, because I used the wrong width of siding, I ran into a little bit of problem covering the ends of the back assembly. I ended up needing to cut a little sliver of siding on my table saw to fill in the gap. To cover up the exposed screw heads, I added another piece of siding to the front of the seat portion. Next, it was time to assemble the flip-top lids. I started by cutting lengths of 2x4s and then decided to join them together using pocket hole joinery. I really appreciate you guys watching. I'm trying to step up my game and give you the best content possible. If you want to help with that, make sure you like this video and hit that subscribe button. I drilled 1.5 inch deep pocket holes along the length of the lid pieces. I then added glue to the joining edges and placed my boards together. I found by clamping the boards together when I'm driving pocket holes that I get a much more accurate joint. Even with the pocket holes, it's important to use outdoor safe fasteners. When the lids were dry, I set them in place on top of the openings of each compartment. I made sure to have an equal 1/2 inch overhang on the front and back. I needed to create a notch that would go around the siding of the back assembly so the lids on the arms would tuck all the way in. I used a speed square to mark the area that needed to be removed, and then used a jigsaw to make the cut. Just between you and I absolutely hate using jigsaws, but it was the right tool for this job. Next, I gave all 3 lids a good sanding before installation. I placed the lids where they needed to go and then made pencil marks to indicate where I needed to drill for hinges. I used full overlay cup hinges, like the kind you find on modern cabinets, and I used the template included to drill 35mm mortises. I used a speed square to help me ensure that I was attaching the hinges straight. Next, my husband came over to help me hold the lids in place while I attached the hinges to the inside of the compartments. Unfortunately, due to the narrow space inside the compartments, I had to use this 90-degree attachment in order to drive the screws. I had to test the hinges a couple of times just to make sure that everything was opening and closing clearly. My husband helped me carry the sofa outside, and the next day it was time for finish. I used my Ryobi power inflator to blow off some dust, and then followed up with some dry paper towels. Okay, it's time to finish this bad boy now, and there's a couple things to keep in mind. First of all, I've got to hurry because I live in Arizona, and by about noon today, it's going to be over 110 degrees. So finish doesn't do so well at those kinds of temperatures. Not only that, but I just don't want to be in direct sun when I'm spraying also. So I got to hurry and get this done this morning. Water-based finishes dry quick and are easy to clean up, but they raise the grain of wood, which means more sanding to flatten it back down. To get around this, I first applied a layer of shellac, which doesn't raise the grain, and then I followed up with 3 coats of a water-based spar urethane. Remember how I just kept making mistakes on this project? Well, here's a doozy. The day that I applied my finish was just way too hot. The sofa was in full sun before it had time to fully dry and cure. Within a couple of hours, the extreme heat had caused these nasty blisters to pop up all over my finish. I needed to get moving, so I set up a pop-up shade structure over the sofa and then pulled out my orbital sander. After sanding off all the blistered clear coat, I then went back and sprayed another coat of shellac and 2 coats of spar urethane. While my finish dried in the shade, I started work on the storage trundle. Basically, I wanted to create a little sled that would slide under the seat and hold additional cushions. To save space, the 2x4 frame needed to be oriented horizontally. The best way to hold the boards together in that arrangement was using more pocket holes. I created a flat rectangular frame and then held the pieces together using more glue and 2.5-inch pocket hole screws. To hold the cushions up off the ground, I added 3 2x4 slats inside the frame. Apparently, my mistakes extend beyond my building and into my video editing because I somehow lost the footage of the last part of the trundle build. No worries, SketchUp and I are still friends, so I made this little animation. I then flipped the trundle frame over and added 8 low-profile trundle bed casters. These casters work with only 1/2 inch of clearance. I attached a 2x6 front board to the trundle using more screws and glue. I then rolled the trundle under the seat of the sofa so I could align the last pieces of siding. I then sanded the trundle and, learning my lesson the day before, applied the finish inside the cool of my garage. Ready to see the sofa all put together? I discovered when I went shopping that sofa cushions are really expensive. Now I'm extra glad that I have some safe places to keep them stored. I think I'm going to attach a tarp to the trundle so I can cover those lower cushions. Remember when I talked about the surprise in one of the storage compartments? I had extra space in one of the arms, so I decided to buy a couple of these really narrow garbage cans with handles. They work perfectly as drop-in ice chests. Who wouldn't want to reach a cold drink without having to get out of your seat? If you're interested in building a sofa of your own, make sure you check out the link to the plans in the description box. I probably should be inviting some friends and family over to enjoy the new outdoor sofa, but honestly right now, I think I just want to take a nap. I've built a few transforming or hidden projects in the past, so make sure you check out this video. And this one as well. Let me know in the comments what you think of this build, and as always, thanks for watching.